All right, since the weekend's here, it's Friday afternoon, and I'm almost caught up with work for the day. Not for good, but for the day. I thought I would just do a fun video or podcast to put out. The first item in this podcast is a chapter from a book called Blood Moon. The author is Jack LaFountain, and the audiobook is now available on Audible. I will put a link in the description. Or you can go to my website. I've got a dozen or so audiobooks I've done. If you want to click on the cover on my website, it'll take you to the Audible page or the Amazon page. And you can buy that audiobook. I've also got 25 promotional codes where you can download this book free, but you have to have an account with Audible. I have done this for the last 4 or 5 books. And half the people that ask for the codes never redeem them because I think they don't have an Audible account. You must have an Audible account. If you don't, please don't ask for a code. You're just wasting it for someone else. But send me an email at dixiecryptid@gmail.com. And in the subject line, if you'll write Blood Moon, so I can see it, it'll jump right at me. I will email you back with a promotional code for Blood Moon by Jack LaFountain. It's a dogman, werewolf, rougarou type of a story. It's actually a mystery. And it's actually number 2 in a series of books that Jack is working on, the Ed Landry series. The first one was Bayou Moon. This one is Blood Moon. And I think his third one, which he's working on now, is called Voodoo Moon. And I hope he hires me to record that one because I love doing Jack's books. But anyway, that's the first story. And then the second story is another fun story that I'm pulling off of my What If It's True podcast channel. It's a story I did, I guess, maybe a year and a half ago. And it's one of my favorite stories I've ever done. So this is just a fun video. It's about 30 or 40 minutes long. I hope you guys enjoy it. No Bigfoot, just fun stories. Just fun stories. Just fun weekend Friday night stories. All right, here we go. Chapter 17. Another one bites the dust. It wasn't sneaking out, not exactly. That's what he kept telling himself. Sneaking implied he was going without permission, and Hugh Mayo did not need anyone's permission to go hunting, ever. Married or not, he had no intention of starting now. He had to admit that marriage had thrown his once comfortable life off track. His priorities had changed. He'd come to care about things that had never before crossed his mind. Things like the position of the toilet seat and the resting place of his dirty underwear. They were small concessions to peace. He didn't mind changes because he loved Emmy. Pleasing her made him profoundly happy, and there was nothing he would not do for her. But this was different, by God. There were some things a man just didn't change. Not even for the woman he loved. Men understood principle. Women had a harder time with it, and Emmy was no exception. Hunting was something man was meant to do. To ease her understanding, he took precautions and loaded the pickup truck yesterday. Now, for the cause of peace, he was tiptoeing out at 8 o'clock while she was next door at her Bible study, leaving the discussion about hunting rights until he got home. Hugh was a quick study. 6 months of marriage had taught him it was easier to apologize for his manly behavior than to try to get Emmy to go along with it. He also found it better to avoid a showdown until after a day of hunting and fishing. He glanced at the note on the kitchen table and told himself once more that Emmy would understand. He thought the single rose atop the note was a nice touch. He coasted down the drive onto Ada Street and popped the clutch. The Ford fired up on cue. He flipped on the headlights and all doubts about his present course vanished. he turned into the hopping sack to fill his empty thermos with coffee that he didn't dare take time to make at home. 10 minutes later, Hugh was back on the road brushing donut crumbs from his coat between sips of coffee, and he turned right at the old Sutterfield place onto a gravel road that led to his destination on White Quail Creek. When he crossed the bridge, he had to steer a wide path around an old Bronco. He stifled a string of swear words that he desperately wanted to be flung at whoever owned that car. He traveled a quarter mile further before easing his Ford onto the shoulder and killing the lights. He pulled his brand new 25-06 Remington from the rack in the back window, and slung it over his shoulder, and scooped up his thermos and fumbled in the console for a mag light. There wasn't much moonlight, but Hugh had hunted this spot off and on for years. He knew the path well, had his headlamp, but he took extra light anyway. The path to the creek remained unchanged since his last trip. The twists and turns were the same ones he always traveled. The oaks along the way had not moved. The rocks sticking out of the path remained in the same place. In fact, everything looked the same. The thing that bothered Hugh was that somehow it didn't feel the same. The old familiar place made his skin crawl. He figured the feeling was guilt, and he tried to shake it off, but it refused to go away. It was like she was watching him. The maliciousness he felt in the watching eyes almost turned him around. Almost, until it met his own anger. Let her stare, he told himself. She could get as mad as she wanted. Come hell or high water, he was going hunting and would stay until the sun came up if he wanted. Emmy would just have to deal with it. Ignoring the sense of being watched, he slipped between the strands of wire and started for the creek. A thick mist rose from the water and hugged the ground between the trees. Hugh shifted his weapon from his shoulder to his hands. His concentration focused on hunting, and the nagging sense of being watched faded altogether. The snap of wood and a nearby footfall brought the feeling back with a vengeance. He was sure there was someone watching him, and it wasn't Emmy. Hugh waited, unmoving, and his finger flipped off the safety and slid along the trigger guard. He slowly exhaled and shifted his weight to take a step. Another twig snapped. Hugh spun toward the sound. "Come on out," he demanded. "Quit creeping around. You want to get shot?" Illuminated by his headlamp, a head shot up from behind a tangle of second growth. Hugh's heart leapt into his throat, and his rifle jumped to his shoulder. The frightened buck bolted out of its cover and bounded away, decidedly not wanting to get shot. "Shit!" The word exploded from him on his pent-up breath. He lowered his weapon, mentally kicking himself, and when he did, a gray streak launched itself from the trees onto the path in front of him. It was a huge wolf. It was impossible, but there it was. Defying reality, the wolf rose to stand upright in the slow motion usually reserved for dreams. Hugh's brain screamed for him to run, but the message flowed as slow as sap to his legs. His eyes never leaving the monster before him, he drew his body into motion, hoping to outflank the beast and get to his truck. The wolf let him go. Hugh felt like he was running through waist-deep water, working hard and going nowhere. Panic-driven steps taken without benefit of watching where he was going took their toll. He stepped in a hole and he went down, his rifle flying from his hands. His feet pedaled against the ground as he tried to crab away. The open jaws of wicked teeth almost seemed to smile at his plight. The wolf dropped down onto all fours, took 2 long galloping strides toward him, and launched its body into the air. Hugh's hand closed on the barrel of his rifle, and he swung it at the flying terror. The blow struck the beast on the front shoulder, knocking its head to one side. The forepaws hit the ground beside Hugh's shoulder. But the monster's back paws dug into Hugh's midsection, ripping the flesh as it pivoted. Hugh rolled to his side as the wolf whirled around. He screamed as the jaws closed around the back of his neck, but the sound was lost in the snap of his spine as the beast shook him until the connection between head and body was nearly broken. Sean washed the blood from his face in the creek before retrieving his clothes from the Bronco's passenger seat and driving away. Jason's happy date mood evaporated when he saw the worried look on Sean's face as he walked toward the table. Ryan tapped out a palm-down gesture for him to cool down. Jason painted a smile on his face. "Hey, bud, where you been?" he asked. "Just been checking out the casino," Sean answered, hooking his thumb at the door. "Lost $20 in there." "Are you old enough to be in there?" Annie asked. "Close enough for them to take my money," Sean answered with a smile. "I'm broke. You buying me a Coke, bro?" "I think it's time we got the girls home," Ryan said. "You can have a Coke at home." "Yeah, we really should get home before Grandma has a fit," Gail agreed. "Besides, we're going riding tomorrow, aren't we?" "Yes, we are," Jason said and stood to go. "I need to go to the bathroom before we go," Annie announced and waved for Gail to accompany her. "We'll be right back." "So, anything you want to tell us before they get back?" Jason asked. The death of some hunter did not concern Jason as much as the talk around Pointer's campfire about tribal burial customs and the old man's suspicion about what might be buried on his ranch. He used driving as an excuse to remain quiet on the drive home. A plan for a workable solution was coming together in his mind. He knew it wouldn't be enough for men like his father, and it seemed these two strangers to let the crimes go unsolved. Sean thought about Landry and Gail's grandfather, who sounded too much like cops not to be some kind of lawman. But both of them were in town before or too soon after Fred's death to have been there because of it. His father didn't believe in coincidences, and maybe he was right on this score. If that were the case, the strangers might be the biggest danger of all. The Pointers and their guests were still around the campfire when Jason came to a stop in front of the big rig. "Say, Sean, how about taking the car up to the house?" he said, turning to look at his friend in the rear seat. "Ryan and I will see the girls home and catch up to you." "Sure, just don't expect there to be any beer left if you take too long getting there." "If you're going to drink," Jason said, "keep clear of my dad, especially if he comes to the house." "Suits me. Now, everybody get out." Jason, Ryan, and the girls piled out of the car and slowly made their way to where the others sat around the campfire, while Sean bounced down the dirt road leading to the house. "Don't tell Grandpa where we went," Gail whispered to Jason. "How was your date?" Pointer asked. "Did you guys have fun?" "Not as much as seems to have gone on here," Jason said, pointing at the pile of empty beer bottles. "Party's over for this guy," James said, rising to his feet. "I want to talk to you before I go." Jason followed his father to his car, feeling pretty sure he knew what was coming. "We saw a wolf up there tonight," the deputy said. "I told you," Jason said. "You didn't hurt him, did you?" "No, but this has got to end before that happens," his father warned, "because these two men don't care who he is." "Just who are they anyway, Dad? And what are they doing here? Better yet, why are you letting them butt in?" "I'm not letting them," James said, ire rising in his voice. "They're here, and they knew before I brought them in that something like this was going on. There's a dead man, and I'm not turning down any help." "Yeah, well, I wouldn't trust them if I were you," Jason told him. "I'm trusting you," his father said, planting a finger on his chest. "Get with Isaiah and figure something out, fast." "You talked to Mr. Boyd?" Jason asked. "What did he say?" "He said that he had never heard of a witch, a shapeshifter, or whatever you call it, being stuck," James told him. "And then he asked to talk to you. I'm not sure why he'd do that, are you?" "To get the background story, I guess," he answered with a shrug. "I was there at the pond. Maybe he knows how to solve this." Jason walked back to the group at the fire and took up a seat between Gail and Ryan. "Trouble?" Ryan whispered, leaning in close. The old man had been somebody. He made it through the Great War unscathed as a radio telegraph operator. While sending messages, he learned a bit about business and investing. He was surprised by the information that went out to the upper echelon in the naval fleet. From that information, he planned his career for after the war, and he did well. He married way above his class after the war and invested in stocks no one else knew anything about. During the Roaring '20s, he had amassed a fortune, but then that dark day in 1929. Just like that, he lost it all. He tried to make do, but his wife was accustomed to so much more, and she fell into a deep depression. He didn't find the arsenic bottle until a week after her funeral. For a man who had once been a celebrity of sorts, he now shunned human contact. He left the mansion and settled on an old shack in the Louisiana swamp. Dressed in old raggedy clothes, his hair and beard left to grow wild, he spent his days walking the bogs and swamps, fishing, hunting, gathering his own food, doing what it took to get by. The locals would see him now and then, and he became a sort of boogeyman in the area. "You kids better watch out. Old man Willie's gonna get you." The Depression finally ended. We went to war again in the 40s, and the economy boomed. And Lucius Clay stayed right where he was. He didn't care anymore. The Cables were a nasty bunch of people, always in trouble, fighting, stealing. The town of Luray considered them white trash. Their mama was a good woman who married a bad man. The marriage lasted for 6 kids to be born, and then James Cable vanished, leaving Miss Cable with nothing but 6 growing boys to feed. South Louisiana in the 50s, no work, no husband, no money, but she did the best she could. The 3 oldest boys robbed a gas station 2 counties over and were on the run from the sheriff now. They took to the swamp until things blew over. A younger brother would bring them food, but they needed a plan. They couldn't stay down there in that swamp forever. They ran across an old shack out there in those swamps, and they now knew where the old hermit lived. The plan made sense to them. They had it all worked out in their head. They came up to a shack about the edge of dark. Their boat motor had quit on them. They said, was it okay if they camped outside his shack until morning? But by midnight, they had drank all the whiskey they had. Little brother hadn't brought food for days. Now they were drunk, hungry, and mean. "That old man ain't as scary as Mama said," the oldest Cable said. They wondered why the old man lived out here like this. Had to be hiding out like they were. Probably robbed a bank or something. Lucius was a legend, and folks said he had a fortune stashed somewhere on that place. Enough for them to leave the area. Hell, enough for them to live like kings. But they needed to find it. They took turns beating the old man. If he didn't give them what they wanted, they're going to have to kill him. But it was something he didn't have. After an hour, the old man broke. Told them boys the money was buried in the swamp, and if they'd quit beating on him, he'd lead them right to it. He grabbed an old lantern and a shovel, and he led them limping out into the swamp. He circled and turned and changed direction, going north and then east and then back north. The Cable boys were lost, and the old man knew it. He knew that swamp like the back of his hand, and he could find his way out in the dark, and that was his plan. He figured it was pushing about 3 in the morning. He had to work fast now. An ancient cypress tree stood in the distance, and he waded through the deep section to get to it. Pointing at the base of the tree, "It's right here, boys. It's 4 feet down. Well, start digging, old man." Lucius took the shovel and he started digging real slow, playing up his injuries and acting like he had trouble catching his air. Impatient with the old man, one of the cable boys yanked the shovel out of his hand and began to furiously dig, making the hole wider and deeper, cussing when he hit a root, and water seeped into the hole. "It ain't here, goddammit!" "Give me the shovel, boy," the old man said, and he stabbed it into the hole, now filled with black water. "You hear that? That's a box. All you got to do is dig it up." All 3 cable boys gathered around the hole, and the old man backed up. One of the boys kneeled down to reach into the water. The shovel hit the back of his head. Lucius was old, but he was still a fighter. The cable boy dropped the lamp into the hole, and it went out. The youngest cable heard the whoosh of a shovel right before it hit him in the face. And it was now so dark none of them could see, but the old man knew where to step, and he casually walked away. He got behind a big oak and gave his eyes time to adjust, and the cables were talking. A gunshot shattered the night. It made the old man jump, but they couldn't hit him. Shooting randomly, they couldn't see. The old man turned and walked deeper into the swamp, staying on a vein of dry ground, and a sly grin creased his cheeks. Back at the tree, the cable urchins were slowly getting off the ground. They couldn't see anything. The blackness of that place at night will suffocate a man. "How are we getting out of here?" said the first. "Well, did you pay attention to how we got here?" another said. "Well, I figured you were watching," said the third, and they stood in that black water, the only humans left on Earth. A tree branch cracked like a stick of dynamite and echoed through the swamp. The old man was way off now, and they heard him laughing. But something else was near, and it was closing on him. The cables turned and wasted their last 3 bullets, and then everything went quiet. The youngest brother was the first to go. Steel jaws clamped onto his waist, just above his belt line. The predator didn't pounce on him. No need to waste calories. It liked feeling its teeth sink into the flesh and taste the blood leak into its mouth. And in a quick motion it backed away with the screaming 20-year-old clamped in its jaws. All the brothers could do was listen to him dig in that water to make an escape that would never come. And soon the water settled and the screaming stopped, and only ripples remained. "Where is he? What the hell was that?" the oldest asked. "We got to get out of here," said the middle brother, right before he was snatched from above by a similar but much larger beast. No sound, no struggle. The beast's mouth covered the man's head, denying him a last scream. His last sensation was his own skull cracking in the mouth of the most foul beast that ever lived in those swamps. Big brother stood in that warm water and he started to cry. He cursed the day they came to Willis Swamp to steal that old man's money. He wiped the mud from his eyes and he pulled his britches up and he wondered which direction to run. He ran face end into an oak tree. He flopped backwards in the water. He couldn't catch his wind. That big old nose was broke and no air would pass, and blood pouring into his mouth made him vomit, a foul mix of whiskey, bile, and beans from a can. By the time he stammered to his knees, he heard it. Heavy, panting. It sounded like a dog, but it was as big as a house. It was already standing over him. It had made no noise approaching. Superheated, foul breath blew his wet hair around. "Eaten by a monster," were his last words. Closing his eyes, thinking it wouldn't last long, but the creature stood there behind him, covering him with a cloud of rotted odor. Smaller creatures ran at him through the water. He was being fed to the litter. One limb at a time, the young ones slowly tore him apart. He was alive for most of it. The sun lit the sky when the old man walked onto his porch. He was tired. Seeing was difficult with his eyes swollen like that. He had work to do, though. But for a minute, he sat on that porch and all the memories of his wife flooded back. He missed her. His chin quivered, but then it stopped. No bringing her back now. He thought about finding another place to live, but this place would still do. He only existed now, and he could do that here. He was going to stay. The cable's boat was pulled on the bank. When he pulled onto the swamp, a heavy piece of channel laid on the bow. That would hold the front down. The 10-horse Evinrude would sink the back. In the deepest hole he knew of, several miles from his shack, he punched holes in the aluminum bottom, and the boat vanished under the black water. He watched the spot for a while in case it floated back up, but a gar fin slowly rippled over the spot, and he knew it was down to stay. It took 10 days for the law to show up. In all the years he had lived there, the law had left him alone. He knew why they were here, but he also knew any evidence of what had happened was gone. The sheriff walked into the tool shed and found him rigging trot lines. "Lucius, how you making it out here these days?" "Well, I'm doing fine. What brings you out here, Sheriff?" Lucius said as he reached for a hook. "3 boys from the other side of the county went missing a couple of weeks back. We've been looking for 'em. Their mama's worried sick." Lucius tied another hook, and the sheriff waited. "I hate that for her," Lucius said. The sheriff shot a brown stream of spit into the ground, looked at Lucius, and he said, "Do you know the Cable boys?" "Never heard the name," Lucius said. "Well, Miss Cable's one of the sweetest women I've ever known, but she wasn't any good at raising boys. The 3 oldest ones are mean. I'll never know why good people wind up with such ornery children. It's a freak of nature, I think. I've had 'em all in jail through the years. All they do is cause problems for me, and they've caused their mama to age way before her time." Lucius tied on another hook. "The thing is, Lucius, they have a younger brother. He's a shut-mouth little punk. But yesterday we leaned on him a little bit. We knew he knew something. He finally said that he heard 'em say they were coming here, to your place, to rob you and then take off out of state." Lucius played the part. He acted surprised. "Why would they want to rob me, Sheriff? I ain't got nothing." The sheriff responded, "Lucius, you act like you don't, but most folks around here think you do. It's none of my business, but years ago when you first showed up here, the sheriff at the time, he did some digging on you. You know how we are, Lucius. A stranger moves to town. We like to know who we're dealing with. Before he retired, Sheriff Dancy told me you came here from New York. Said you were a wealthy man trying to hide from something, but he never figured out what it was. You ain't never been a problem while you lived here, and we left you alone. But don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. In town, you're a legend around here. Folks say you got a lot of money buried in this mud. Some say you're the rich old boogeyman." Lucius thought for a minute, and he finally said, "I guess if I had all that money buried out here, or if I was poor as dirt, that ain't nobody's business. Is this why you came all the way out here, to ask me if I have money buried, Sheriff?" "No, I'm asking if those Cable boys showed up here in the last 2 weeks, Lucius. According to their brother, they were headed this way." "Well, I already told you I don't know the name," Lucius lied. "If they came here to rob me, you'd have heard from me by now." "Well, I suppose so. Looks like you've been in a fight with a she-cat, Lucius." The sheriff was looking at his healing wounds on the old man's face. Lucius forgot about the way his face looked. It was rare for the old man to look at himself in the mirror. He had cleaned the wounds 2 weeks ago and forgot about them. But the old man never acknowledged the wounds on his face. He just kept tying hooks. "Okay, then. If you hear anything or happen to run into those boys, you make sure and let me know." Lucius nodded, and the conversation was over, and the sheriff left. The farmer found the cow laying dead in the woods. The stillborn calf was near, half eaten by the dogs and buzzards and maggots. He cut the cow in pieces and he loaded her up. In an hour he pulled into the old man's yard and threw the chunks of the cow on the ground, and he left. The old man always took the meat. He said he liked feeding the gators. Nobody understood why, but when they had a dead bovine, they brought it to Lucius Clay. When he returned from checking his crawfish traps, he loaded the cow in his boat and slowly trolled deep into the swamp, the place he never went unless he had something to trade. The boat ground on the sandbar. With the motor still running, he hauled the parts onto the bank, and then he quickly got off that sandbar. Don't stay too long. Don't stay too long. At a safe distance now, he cut the motor, and he waited. It never took them long. They always showed up pretty quick. An adult female broke through the vines and onto the bank. It was half prehistoric wolf and half something that should have never been born on God's planet, and it hovered over the decaying meat. One short yelp brought the litter, and they all fed at once. It was all gone in 5 minutes, the bones dragged off by fighting siblings making noises from hell. The female lifted her head, sniffed the air as if to nod at Lucius. Lucius nodded back, and then he vanished into the swamp. For the next mile he laughed. He laughed harder than he had ever laughed. He thought about those cable boys being eaten just like that calf. The evil echoed through the swamps as a chuckle. Years passed and the legend of that old man died away. That old shack is still there, abandoned, covered in vines, full of cottonmouths and hornets. If you walk up next to the water where that old shack is, and you get real quiet for a while, you can hear that old man laughing, and you can hear 3 young men scream. And if you ever go back in the woolly swamp, you better not go at night. There's things out there in the middle of them woods to make a grown man die from fright. Things that crawl and things that fly and things that creep around on the ground. And they say the ghost of Lucius Clay gets up and it walks around. Hey, thank you all for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Again, if you like a promo code for Blood Moon, send me an email to dixiecryptid@gmail.com. In the subject line, write Blood Moon. I'll return the email with a promo code. It'll give you a link to go to enter the promo code, and you'll be able to download the Audible book for free, and you must have an Audible account. And we'll see you guys on the next podcast. I really appreciate you. See you next time. Thanks.